And we have three sets of results. What people think is the main achievement so far, what they think is the main failure, and perhaps most important, given that the government has only been in place about 7 months, what are the three areas that Kenyans would most like the government to address in its remaining 4.5 years? And again, we've made the same separation of the sample. In terms of the total, the achievement that most people could identify was the launch of the Hustler Fund at 29%. Again, this was a single response question. It doesn't mean that 29% of our respondents think the launch of the Hustler Fund was a good thing. It means when they were given the chance to give just one answer, and you see the question at the bottom of the screen, what you consider the main achievement, if any, single response, and these are not read out. People have to come up with them from their own mawazos. All right, we're not prompting them. Do you think this was an achievement? Do you think that was an achievement? Hakuna kitu kama hiyo. They themselves come up with the answer. And you can also see across the top that supporters of Kenya Kwanza are more likely to give the Hustler Fund launch the identification as the main achievement at 37%, even if 22% of Azimio supporters also mentioned the launch of the Hustler Fund, which for supporters of both coalitions was the most often mentioned achievement of the government so far. No disagreement about that. What is perhaps not surprising is that twice as many supporters of Azimio as Kenya Kwanza said, as far as they're concerned, there's been no achievement so far. 54 versus 23. And you might think also that the figure of 23% is a bit surprising. After all, these are people who, in the other question, which political coalition do you support? Walitaja, Kenya Kwanza. And yet nearly a quarter of them were unable or failed to identify any achievement of the government that they support so far. So the question really that I would ask you to analyze, what are these people waiting for? What does the government have to do so that this figure would go down, if not to zero, but at least be even lower than it is? And the other question is, given the fact that these respondents are supporting the Odinga-led Azimio coalition, is there anything this government could do that would encourage these people to say, yes, this has just been an achievement? Or are they refusing to mention any achievement just because they're unhappy that their candidate didn't win and is not the president? So what's really in their minds? But I think this figure at the bottom tells us a lot. Overall, to repeat, the fact that we're only in 7 months of the government, and many of the policies which are being put in place will take time, kuleta matunda, according to the leaders of the Kenya Kwanza government. It's perhaps not surprising that so many Kenyans, kwa jumla, 38%, are saying, bado hawajaona matokeo ya manufaa ya serikali kuu. And this is another reason why TIFA will be wanting to track this question over the next few years and see how these figures are going to change. When we come to the main failure, because then we ask the other question, all right, you've told us the main achievement. What do you think is the main failure? Again, a single response question. Overwhelmingly, it's economic hardship. Again, in a single mention. 37% of all our respondents. Slightly more supporters of Azimio mentioned this than supporters of Kenya Kwanza. 41 versus 35, but that's only a 6% difference. And people who are would not identify with any coalition, 34%. Also, I could identify economic hardship. Now, we had quite a few answers that weren't entirely clear, but basically they were telling us that promises that were made during the campaign have not been kept. And many of those promises were also economic, as you know. So, to a certain extent, it would make sense to combine these top two figures. Although there were many other campaign promises that were made that weren't specifically economic, but many were. And then we get to other less frequent mentions, like the perception that the war on corruption has slowed down. A lot of cases have been dropped. Increasing public debt was mentioned by, what is that, 6%? Problems in the education sector, so on and so forth. In contrast to the previous slide, where we had many more Azimio supporters saying they couldn't recognize any achievement, now we have rather more supporters of the Kenya Kwanza government saying that there has been no failure, 21%. There's nothing that they failed to do. Whereas 15% of Azimio supporters, only 6% of Kenya Kwanza supporters said there's no failure. Almost 4 times as many, between 3 and 4 times as many Kenya Kwanza supporters saying there has been no failure. So these 21% are really defending the Kenya Kwanza government. 1 out of 5 of them saying there is no way that they have failed up to now. Then we move on to what I said earlier, the last part of this section, when we ask people, tell us 3 things, 3 issues that you would really like the government to address in the remainder of its term. That is, during the next 5 years.